You're listening to Psychology of the Strange, a podcast exploring the psychology behind fear, folklore, the uncanny, and the unexplained. This show is brought to you by the Darkcast Network. Welcome to the dark side. There's always one person. Every family has them. Every town has them. The one strange things seem to follow. They're the kid who swore someone sat on the edge of their bed at night. The teen who kept seeing shadows move in empty rooms. The adult who moves houses 3 times. And somehow, the footsteps come with them. Lights flicker around them. Objects go missing around them. They're always the first to say, "Did you hear that?" And after a while, people start joking. You're haunted. But what if they're not joking? What if some people don't just experience one ghost story? What if they spend their whole lives feeling like the world is just slightly thinner around them? Like something is always watching. Like reality has loose seams. Not because their house is haunted, but because they are. So today, we're talking about something psychologists quietly call haunted people syndrome, and why the most haunted places might not be haunted places at all. It might just be the people who are haunted. Wylan didn't move into the house expecting anything strange to happen. It wasn't old or particularly atmospheric. It didn't have the kind of history people whisper about. It was just a normal family home on a normal street. The sort of place where you imagine homework at the kitchen table and laundry humming in the background and the slow, ordinary accumulation of years. For a while, that's exactly what it was. The first thing he noticed was so small it barely registered. Late one night, after everyone had gone to bed, he heard footsteps in the hallway outside the bedroom. Soft, measured, the kind of sound that makes you think one of the kids got up for water. He lay there for a moment, listening, expecting to hear the bathroom light click on. Nothing. In the morning, both kids insisted they'd slept through the night. He shrugged it off. Houses make noise, wood contracts, pipes knock. Anyone who's lived somewhere long enough knows that buildings have their own language. But the footsteps came back. Not every night, just often enough that he started recognizing the rhythm of them. A few steps, a pause, a turn. Like someone walking the length of the hallway and stopping just outside the bedroom door before heading back the other way. It was subtle and easy to dismiss, until other things began to stack on top of it. He would come downstairs in the morning and find the cabinet doors hanging open, even though he distinctly remembered closing them. The faucet running in the sink, lights on in rooms no one had used, small inconveniences, the kinds of things you could blame on distraction or memory. Except that everyone in the family began blaming each other. Did you leave this on? Did you open this? Was that you? And more often, the answer was no. Then one afternoon, in broad daylight with the sun pouring through the windows, he walked into the kitchen and stopped short. Every cabinet door was open, not one or two, all of them. The drawers were pulled out, the cupboards hung wide open, even the microwave was hanging slightly open, like the room had been searched by invisible hands. He stood there for a long moment just staring, trying to reconstruct how it could have happened without him noticing. He went around the kitchen, closing each and every one, making sure the latches caught, feeling a little ridiculous for how careful he was being. As he finished, the basement door at the end of the hall began to rattle against its frame, a soft, persistent shaking. He went over to check it, half expecting a draft or the dog behind it. Nothing. When he turned back towards the kitchen, every cabinet and drawer was open again, exactly the way they had been before. That was the first time he felt something like fear. Not the jump scare kind, not adrenaline, something slower, colder, a quiet realization that he couldn't explain what he had just seen. After that, the house stopped feeling neutral. It began to feel watchful. Doors would open on their own, sometimes slowly, the hinges stretching out in a long creak like a breath. Sometimes violently, slamming hard enough to echo through the rooms. The hallway lights flickered in uneven bursts, off and on, again and again, like someone playing with the light switch. He started filming it, mostly to prove to himself that there had been a logical explanation. And on the recordings, you can hear it. The low groan of a door easing open with no one near it. The sharp crack of one slamming shut. The light stuttering in the empty hallway. Then there were the sounds that felt personal. One day, a guitar sitting untouched on its stand suddenly rang out. Not a crash, not something falling, just the unmistakable sound of fingers brushing slowly across every string. A clean, deliberate strum. It was such a human sound that it made his stomach drop. Around the same time, his daughter began waking at night, standing beside their bed and whispering something, that someone had been in her room, a tall figure near the doorway, watching. The dog refused to go down the hallway some nights, planting its feet and growling at nothing he could see. And then came the knocking. It would start at the front door, 3 or 4 firm knocks, enough that you'd assume someone was there. He'd open it immediately, but there was no one there. Sometimes it would happen again 5 minutes later, and again, for hours at times. Like something was testing the boundary between inside and outside. One night he saw what looked like hands hitting the sliding glass door at the back of the house. Flat, frantic impacts against the glass. He killed the lights inside and flipped on the porch light, expecting to catch someone running across the yard. But the patio was empty. No footprints, no movement, just still air and his own reflection staring back at him. This went on for more than 2 years. Not a burst of activity, not a bad month, but years. Long enough that the house began shaping their moods. Long enough that sleep got thin, and arguments came faster, and everyone felt a little on edge all the time. In the later videos, you can hear the change in his voice. At first, he sounds curious, analytical. Later, he sounds tired and frustrated. He starts talking out loud to empty rooms. "What are you? This has got to stop. You've got to go." Not dramatic, not performative. Just a man alone in his kitchen, asking the air to please let him rest. At one point, almost under his breath, he says, "I think I'm going crazy." And you can hear that he means it. Eventually, they decide to leave. Not because of ghosts, at least not officially. They told themselves it was for more space, better light, a fresh start. They packed everything up and moved into a completely different house across town. New walls, new layout, new sounds. For a few days, it was quiet. And then, late one night, he woke to the familiar sound of pacing in the hallway outside the bedroom. The same slow rhythm, the same pause outside the door, like it had been memorized where he slept. And sometime later, alone in the house, he recorded something else. A sudden, ragged scream. A voice shouting no in an empty room. A different house. Same story. At a certain point, you stop asking whether a place is haunted, and you start wondering something much stranger. What happens when the haunting doesn't stay behind? What happens when it comes with you? When you hear a story like that, it's tempting to sort it into one of two boxes. It's either something supernatural, something following a family from house to house, or it's nothing at all. Stress, imagination, an overreaction, or maybe just posting for likes and engagement. So we're left with two choices: ghost or nonsense. Those are usually the only options we're given. But what fascinates me is that there's a third possibility, one that's quieter and honestly much more interesting. Because stories like his show up more often than you'd think. Not just one haunted house, not just one late night shadow, but the same person across different places, reporting the same kinds of experiences over and over again. Footsteps, doors, voices, the feeling of being watched, sometimes for months, sometimes for years. And psychologists have been quietly studying exactly this kind of story for decades. Not the supernatural explanation, not trying to prove or disprove spirits, but looking at a simpler question. Why do certain people across different homes in different stages of life consistently report the world behaving as if it's haunted? Because once you start collecting these cases, you notice something strange. It isn't just particular houses that have activity. It's particular people. The same person moves 3 times and reports similar experiences in each place. Most hauntings tend to happen at night, or in that strange gray space between sleeping and waking, the hour when the house is quiet and your thoughts feel heavier than usual. Neurologically, that state is incredibly unstable. Parts of the brain that generate dreams are still active, while parts responsible for rational interpretation are only about half online. In that state, the brain can generate sounds that feel external. Sounds like footsteps or whispers or someone calling your name. It can generate visual fragments, like shadows and figures and movements in doorways. There's even a well-documented phenomenon called a felt presence, where people become absolutely certain someone else is in the room with them. And here's the unsettling part. These experiences feel completely real. not dreamlike or hazy, but real. People across cultures report the same things. A tall shadow figure, someone standing near the bed, pressure on the chest, footsteps down the hallway. For centuries, we called these demons, spirits, and intruders. Now we call them sleep-related hallucinations. They're the same experience, but a different framework. Now, if you add on chronic stress to that, like the 2 years of disrupted sleep, 2 years of being on guard in your own house, 2 years of listening for sounds at night and scanning every shadow during the day. Stress changes perception in very predictable ways. It keeps the nervous system activated, it makes you hypervigilant, and it turns the brain into a pattern detection machine. Now, from an evolutionary standpoint, this makes complete sense. If you're in danger, you want to detect threats quickly. The brain would rather give you 10 false alarms than miss one real one. So it starts connecting dots aggressively. A random noise becomes footsteps. A draft becomes a door moving on its own. A flickering light becomes intentional. It's not quite imagination. It's a survival system working overtime. But here's where it gets a little more subtle. Once the brain forms a narrative, once it decides, even tentatively, something might be here, it begins organizing perception around that story. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, but that phrase sounds a little too clinical for what it really is. It's storytelling. The brain is constantly telling itself stories to make sense of the world. And once the haunted story takes root, every ambiguous event slots neatly into place. The faucet left on isn't forgetfulness, it's paranormal activity. The dog growling isn't random, it's sensing something that we just can't see. The cabinet doors aren't just opened, they were opened. And importantly, this process is often social. Families don't experience their homes individually. They experience them together. One person hears something and mentions it. Now everyone listens a little more closely. A child says she saw someone in the doorway. Now that doorway feels charged for everyone. Attention spreads, interpretation spreads, not because anyone is lying, but because we as people are collaborative perceivers. We literally help construct each other's realities. If you've ever convinced yourself a restaurant was cold because someone else said it first, you've experienced this on a tiny scale. Now imagine that happening with fear. There's another factor researchers talk about that I find especially interesting, something called absorption. Absorption is basically how deeply you can immerse yourself in your own inner world. People high in absorption don't just imagine things, they experience imagination vividly. Memories feel sensory. Music can give them chills. Stories pull them in completely. These people tend to be creative, intuitive, and empathetic. They're artists and writers and spiritual types. These people are people who feel things deeply. But the flip side is that boundary between internal and external experience can be a little thinner. A thought can feel louder. A mental image can feel almost visible. This is just a cognitive style. But under stress and sleep disruption, that style can make ambiguous stimuli feel intensely real. And when you combine all of this, the poor sleep, hypervigilance, pattern detection, family reinforcement, vivid perception, you get something fascinating. Not madness, not possession, but a brain that is extremely good at detecting significance in uncertainty. So good that sometimes it might overshoot. And that's where the term haunted people syndrome comes into play. Haunted people syndrome is used to describe this cluster of traits and experiences. It sounds dramatic, but it's not a diagnosis. It's just a shorthand for a pattern. Certain people consistently experience their environments as if they're haunted. And what I love about this framing is that it's compassionate. It doesn't say that this isn't real, because the experiences are very real to the person who's having them. The fear is real, the exhaustion is real, and the uncertainty is real. The brain is simply trying, desperately, to make meaning out of a world that feels unpredictable. And maybe that's why stories like his stick with us, because they sit right at the edge between two explanations. Something out there or something in here. And honestly, the mind might be the stranger place of the two. Now, I'm not here to say ghosts aren't real or that they are, or that it's all just an interesting psychological phenomenon. But it is certainly a plausible solution. It helps to scientifically start to create a boundary between true anomalous experiences and interesting patterns. Haunted people syndrome at its core isn't about proving or disproving anything supernatural. It's about recognizing that some individuals seem to move through the world with a heightened sensitivity to ambiguity, noticing the patterns, sensing meaning, feeling the emotional weight of environments in ways that can be both fascinating and exhausting at the same time. And that's where this connects for me to the theme we've been exploring this season so far. Because when something strange happens, when a sound has no clear source, when an experience feels intentional but unexplainable, we're faced with a choice in how we interpret it. We can frame it as something external, something acting on us, or we can frame it as something emerging from within, from perception, our memories, expectations, and the brain's constant effort to predict and to protect. Historically, those moments have often been interpreted through the language of good and evil, benevolent forces, malevolent presences, something watching from the shadows. And today we have different frameworks, but the emotional experience hasn't changed. We still stand in the same uncertain spaces, asking whether what we're encountering is threat, meaning, coincidence, or something we don't yet understand. And perhaps what haunted people syndrome really reveals is how thin that boundary can be, how easily the mind moves between interpreting an experience as mysterious, psychological, symbolic, or even sinister. In a world where experiences are increasingly shared and shaped in public spaces, there's also a quiet reminder that storytelling itself lives on that boundary. We are always interpreting, always framing, always deciding what something means, whether we're telling a story to a friend, writing in a journal, or sharing something on social media with a wider audience. But even beyond any individual story, the deeper question remains. Why do certain experiences feel charged with intention? Why do they linger? And maybe it's because uncertainty touches something very old in us, a part of the mind that has always searched for signals of danger or meaning, for signs of what is safe and what is not. And in that sense, the line between good and evil isn't always about external forces. Sometimes it's about interpretation, about how we decide whether something unknown is a threat, a message, or a misunderstanding, or simply part of the complex way that the human mind engages with the world. So, whether we understand these experiences through psychology or through stories passed down across generations, they remind us something fundamental, that living with uncertainty requires us to constantly negotiate what we believe about the world and about ourselves. And perhaps that negotiation, more than any footsteps in the hallway, is where the real mystery lives.